Good morning. So we are in this series, It's Not About the Lions. We've been looking at this book called Daniel. And if you have your Bibles with you today, I'd love for you to turn with me to the book of Daniel. We're going to be in chapter 3 of Daniel. And we're going to look at kind of an unusual story today. Today, we are talking about the topic of idolatry. And I know immediately you're like, yes, I was hoping we'd talk about that today. Like, it seems like a weird topic because idolatry feels like something that, like idols, right? Carved, graven images, that kind of thing, like that people used to sometimes bow down and worship that we don't worship anymore. So it feels like a weird topic to talk about. But I think that idolatry is often linked to something that people were looking for thousands of years ago and we're still looking for now. Oftentimes, idolatry is linked to our search for purpose. We're all looking for purpose and meaning in life. And so we attach ourselves to things that seem purposeful, meaningful, full of purpose and meaning. And that's not new. Obviously, that's quite ancient. But if you're new here, and here's what's really cool. Every week we have folks who come and are part of Inland Hills Church and have been following Jesus for a while, a few months, a few years, decades sometimes. And every week we have folks who are maybe spiritually curious. They're not sure yet what they think about faith or about Jesus, but they join us either here in person or online. And we're so thankful wherever you are on that you've decided to participate with us today. Like we have some beliefs here as a church. You may not share them yet, and that's okay. But here's one of the beliefs that we have. We just believe that you'll never find your true purpose outside of Jesus. See, our belief is that Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith, and that Jesus is the creator and sustainer of the entire universe. And so it's our belief then that if you get separated from your creator, you can't fully fulfill your purpose because it is your creator who created you on purpose for a purpose. So that's kind of where we're at. You may not be there, but that's where we're at. And so then what we do is we look for purpose in all kinds of other things, and those other things are things that we might call modern day idols. So for today's purpose, an idol is something that we look to for things that only God can give. As we look through the scriptures, as we look after the stories of Jesus, this is kind of the definition that comes up for me. I think this is maybe the plainest way to say it. So again, whether you're a follower of Jesus yet or not, that's a way to think about what idolatry is. And then as we start to explore this today, hopefully it'll become clear that there are all kinds of things that our culture has made an idol out of. And one other way to think about idolatry is when we make good things ultimate things. So there's all kinds of stuff that we enjoy that are good things. You know, love can be good. Music can be good. Money can be good. These things can be good. But when we take these good things and make them ultimate things, when we try to find our purpose out of them instead of out of God, that's when they become idolatrous. So there's all kinds of things you may like, and they may be really good things. You know, some of us really like, we're car people, right? We enjoy our pickup trucks, or we enjoy our cars. Some of us are huge fans of Ford. Some of us are huge fans of Chevy. Some of us are animal people. Some of us are huge fans of dogs. Some of us are huge fans of cats. Some of us love country music, and some of us love real music. So you may have things that you enjoy, and those things are not bad. What's bad is when we make good things ultimate things, or when we find something that we look to for things that only God can give us, for purpose and meaning that only God can give us. So I want us to walk through this story. It's in Daniel chapter 3, and I just, like, cards on the table, this is a strange story. It's actually meant as a satirical story. So there's satire and humor built into this, and you're going to see this over and over. There's a flow and a rhythm to this story. There's lists of things that get repeated over and over again. And so the author is clearly trying to make a point, and the author is also trying to draw out some of the humor that's in this story. And then the story ends in what I think is today a fairly unfulfilling way. It's like, the good guys win, kind of. And so we'll get there in just a minute. It is a weird story, but it's in Daniel chapter 3. And here's the story. And a little bit of background going into it. We started reading in this book of Daniel, in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, last week. And what we talked about last week is that the Babylonian Empire has conquered the Jewish Empire. And Jerusalem, the capital city of Judah, has basically been cleared out, and all of these people have been taken captive into the Babylonian Empire. And the Babylonian Empire took Daniel and a bunch of Daniel's friends, we're going to look at some of them today, and put them into the courts. They gave them positions of authority and power. And as we said last week, while scholars disagree about specifically why that was done, generally the consensus is that probably they're trying to assimilate these Jewish people into the Babylonian Empire, to kind of wipe them out, to eradicate them. Like, you're one of us now is essentially the motive here. And so we pick this up in Daniel chapter 3, and this very bizarre story starts like this. King Nebuchadnezzar, awesome name for a king, by the way, Nebuchadnezzar. It sounds, or even for a little boy, little Nebby, like it's a great start. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. So this is like 90 feet high and about 9 feet wide. So it's very tall and very skinny. And we don't know for sure what the image was. We don't know for sure if it was of one of the gods that the Babylonians worshipped. Perhaps it was an image of the king himself. Perhaps it was something totally different. But if it had some kind of human form, it probably had a big pedestal at the bottom because it's a very thin idol to be so tall. But this is the dimension, so it's really, really tall. He sets it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And he then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. And then he's going to make a little announcement. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." So here's the invitation. We've set up this image. It's literally an idol. This story is going to be very on the nose, just so that we're clear on that. There's no ambiguity about what's right and what's wrong in this particular story. Here's an idol. And all of you have to fall down and worship it, which for a Jewish person who believed that there was one true God, and that God was Yahweh, and you were to have no other gods that you worshiped, this was anathema to you. You could not do this and still consider yourself a faithful Jew. But so they have these Babylonians in this land full of Jews who they've taken from Jerusalem, but this command is for everyone. All Babylonians, all Jews, every language, every religion. When you hear these sounds, you have to bow down to this idol. And there's a consequence if you don't. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Okay, so the stakes are clear. You bow down and you worship this thing, or you get thrown into a blazing fire. We will murder you until you die. Like that's the stakes. Okay, therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, and all kinds of music. What a rad band, by the way. That would just be amazing. All the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Well, almost all the nations and almost all the people. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace." Are we clear on what the stakes are at this point? The author's beating us over the head with this, okay? Like, we should be pretty obvious. We'll be thrown into a blazing. But there are some Jews who you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. So they're not just Jews, they're Jews with authority and power, king. Power that you gave them. You see this? You ever hired someone or you've been a part of a hiring process of someone and then they join the company and it's like, "Oh, we've made a huge mistake." And then it's like, "Oh, it was my mistake." That's what's happened here. "Oh, wait, hey, these guys that you gave authority, yeah, they're not doing what you said you had to do." So it reflects badly on them because they're not bowing down, and there's this horrible punishment that you now need to hand down to them. But also, king, remember who put them in charge. You. It's your problem, and it's your fault. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. When I was a kid, I remember a pastor in my church saying, "Now originally these guys were in real estate, and their names were my shack, your shack, and a bungalow." Ha, 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 ha. Yeah. It's not any better of a joke 25 years later, okay? All right, so who pay no attention to you, your majesty. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are ignoring your commands, and you've been very clear about what the punishment is for ignoring your commands. And they neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you have set up. So this isn't just something that angers him because people aren't listening to him. It angers him because people who he gave authority aren't listening to him. It reflects badly on him as well. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up?" Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? I love that last sentence because that last little stab, right? It's laying the stake. I mean, right? It's a very black and white story. It's laying the stakes out. It's easy to see what they're supposed to do, what they're not. It's easy to see what the punishment will be if they don't do it. And that little sting at the end, right? And nor will your God be able to save you. So what's the response? What's the reply? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. The answer is a bit spiteful. Our God can, our God will. Right? That's the response. But catch this. Even if he does not, we will not bow down to this golden image in front of us. We believe he can. We trust he will. But we don't know everything. Maybe he has reasons for refusing to intercede. We don't know. Regardless of the outcome, we won't bow down to this idol. Well, that doesn't go well. Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. Remember, his attitude toward them wasn't good before. It got worse. In fact, it gets so bad, he orders something unheard of. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. By the way, I always wondered, how did they know it was 7 times? I assume there wasn't a Weber grill style gauge on the side, right? Or maybe they had a little tester guy who was like, ooh, that's about 7 times hotter. I have no idea. But they heated it 7 times hotter. They probably had a bunch of billows. They probably just upped the amount of billows and like 7 times what they normally were. And they commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, their trousers, their turbans, and their other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. And the king's command was so urgent, and the furnace was so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. It's so hot that even these strong, powerful, Avengers-like soldiers who go and throw them into this burning furnace die at the foot of it. That's how hot it is. So you know that the king is just feeling pretty good about himself at this point. Well, I showed them. It wasn't enough to just do what he said he would do. He needed to make an example out of them. He needed to show that if you defy the order of the king, there is a price to pay. You strike fear in the hearts of everyone else so that from now on, they will do what you tell them to do. But the story doesn't end there. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? And they replied, oh, yea, verily, verily, live long forever, O king. Certainly we did. Yes, there were 3 men that we threw into the fire. And he said, well, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th one looks like a son of the gods. Well, what's going on with that? So we don't know for sure how he saw them. Perhaps there was a way to look in or look down or wherever it was, but he sees this 4th being in the midst of them, and they're walking around and they seem unharmed. So Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and he shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. If I'd have been Shadrach, I'd have been like, no, man, you come in here, right? But they do come out. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them, and they saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their head singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Now, so far, the story goes kind of how you might imagine the story would go, since you know it's written down by servants of Yahweh, servants of this God, right? Okay. They defied a king, God interceded, and they win. Happy ending. God wins. Perfect. But it takes a real weird turn here at the end, especially on this side of Jesus. Knowing more than we once did about the heart of God, because when we're told repeatedly in the New Testament that Jesus is the exact representation of the Father. We know more about his grace, his mercy, his love, and the way that he loves each and every person than we once did, because Jesus has fully revealed himself. That is a common occurrence, a theme that we see all throughout the New Testament. And so looking at this story through Christ-like eyes, the ending is a little disturbing. Here's the ending. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." So far, so good. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces. Okay? We're like at Suicide Squad levels here at this point. Okay? Be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. Original Hebrew is more like piles of dung. Chino, and Chino Hill's kind of definition would be cow patty, okay? So it's like your house, may your home be turned into a cow patty. For no other God can save in this way. This should make us at least a little uncomfortable. Why? Because Nebuchadnezzar is attracted to whatever will give him the most power. And this God seems to be the God who was able to miraculously intercede and save Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So this is the God I will follow, and all of you who follow me, don't mess this up for me, you need to follow him too. Because in Nebuchadnezzar's world, the way to have more power is to get the gods on your side. And the way to get the gods on your side is to align yourself with them, to dedicate to them, to make sacrifices to them, to get your people to follow after them. And so Nebuchadnezzar is in this awkward place of saying he follows the one true God and yet completely missing the heart of that God. End of story. Close curtain. It's a strange story. It's a black and white story. Right? It's very easy to figure out who the heroes are supposed to be, who the villain is, what the right thing is to do, what the risk is if you do it. Like, that's all easy to figure out. It's easy to figure out that God intervenes and that God saves the faithful in this story. But it's a strange story. And it doesn't always mirror our lives, because the reality is, like, something to pull from this, to be hopeful about, is that these men had a conviction that they would not follow after a false god, an idol. They weren't going to do that. But I don't believe that idols are always so easy to figure out as they were in this story. And so I just want to spend the rest of our time together talking about modern day idols, because they don't typically look like 90-foot tall statues. Remember what we said at the beginning. An idol is something that we look to for things that only God can give. Pastor Tim Keller says this about our culture. He says, any dominant cultural hope that is not God himself is a counterfeit God. Idols then do not only take individual form, but can be corporate and systemic. When we are completely immersed in a society of people who consider a particular idolatrous attachment normal, it becomes almost impossible to discern it for what it is. In other words, every culture that has ever existed has had some good parts about it and some bad parts about it. So if you're a follower of Jesus and you're getting your value system and your worldview from Jesus, then any culture that you might visit or dwell within, you will see parts of it that align with the way that Jesus would have us live, and you will see parts of it that do not align with the way Jesus would have us live. So there's good parts of culture and there's bad parts of culture. And what's difficult is when you live within a culture long enough, You get so immersed in that culture that there's lots of people who don't see the bad part of the culture. It's just not obvious to them. They're not steeped in the teachings of Jesus. And because we're surrounded by people who are living into some of the negative parts of their culture, we can start to think that that's normal, and it becomes difficult to parse out what aligns with Jesus and what doesn't. We just continue on this track like we've been on the whole time. And so we can sometimes embrace idols within our culture and not even realize it. What Keller is saying here is that, right, when we are completely immersed in a society of people who consider a particular idolatrous attachment normal, it becomes almost impossible to discern it for what it is. Maybe another way of saying this is when everyone is bowing down, standing seems unthinkable. Why? Because just everybody's doing it. And so we just don't even think twice about it. Like, we just go with the flow. When everybody's bowing down, standing seems unthinkable. Like, this brings us to a man named August Landmesser. And there was a photo that went viral a few years ago. It's an old photo taken from World War II, or that time period of World War II. And there is some disagreement over whether it's actually August Landmesser in the photo or not. There's a couple of possibilities, but we're going to go with him because he's the most most people think it's this guy. This man was a German living in Nazi Germany, but he fell in love with a Jewish woman. And this photo that went viral was a photo of people at a Nazi parade all giving the Heil Hitler salute. Here they are. But there's one guy, he's hard to even see, there's so many hands up. There's one guy in the crowd who does not give the salute. And we see this photo, and we'd like to think that if we were in this crowd, that would be us. We'd be the person not giving the salute. But if we're honest with ourselves, we have to know that being this guy is really hard. It's hard to even know that you're supposed to be that guy when everybody else in the crowd is aligned. It's really difficult. And so I want us to talk through 3 idols today that are just so ingrained in our culture that we don't normally even think of them as idols. That's not a word we would typically think of them. But again, these are areas that we look to for purpose. We look to them for things that only God can provide. And therefore, they are ultimately unfulfilling. And we make these things, which can be good. We make these good things into ultimate things. And again, if we're not mindful, we'll just continue to go with the flow. And it takes a lot of intentionality and, frankly, a lot of gumption and a lot of self-awareness to be this guy. That's difficult. So 3 things, and then we're done. I'm just going to take a few minutes on each. We could have made a list of 20, but I just want to take 3 that I think are maybe the most prominent today. The first one, love and sex. A lot of times when we're looking for ultimate fulfillment, our culture tells us we need to find it in love and sex. And we have these movies that we will watch that are great movies, and they're funny movies. And they basically tell us that the ultimate way that we can fulfill ourselves is to find our contentment in someone else. You know, like some of our best lines from movies, you know, you complete me. I'll never let go, Jack. I'll never let go. Nobody puts baby in a corner, right? Like we have these great lines from movies that are like, yes, that's true love. And the way the movie typically goes is it almost always shows the first part of a romantic relationship. You remember that part, right? There's the flirting for a few days or a few weeks or sometimes a few months, sometimes a few years. And there's I like them. Do they like me back? Do you think they like me back? And maybe you have that night of honesty where you're like, you figure out you're both in the same boat. And it's like, oh my gosh, we're both here. Or maybe your hands kind of like brush against each other as you're walking and talking. And you're like, was that on purpose? I think that might have been on purpose. And they brush again, and you're like, oh my gosh, that was on purpose. And you find yourselves like holding hands, like, you know, kind of loosely, because you don't want to be like too aggressive about it. And then like a few minutes later, you're like in this hand death grip, like where you've got each other and it's like, yes, we've been waiting for this moment. It's so exciting. And then you're so excited to hear from them, you know? You're getting text messages from them and you're just like, your heart pitter patters every time, or they call you. And I know if you're under the age of like 25, calling, what is that? What is a phone even? Like, I know, it's just a text message device. But some of you are old enough to remember getting emails from your first love, right? Or letters in the mail. Yeah, most of us are not that old. Like, so there's this communication that starts to happen, and this heart pitter pattern, this excitement, this enthusiasm, and it just feels so good. And it's so exciting. And in fact, because it's so exciting, and there's some mystery and some intrigue and some risk involved. Sometimes we'll get with someone who is totally wrong for us, but we'll convince ourselves that they aren't because we're in the exciting phase. That's true love, we tell ourselves. For some of us, we've watched these movies and we've become convinced that the way toward ultimate fulfillment, if I could just find the right person to complete me. Well, for some of us, we've watched a lot of pornography. And the message that we've received is that if I could just continue to have these physical encounters, maybe we're not looking for love, we're looking for physical fulfillment. And with every encounter we have, it gives us like a hit of dopamine. It gives us some thrill and excitement that someone else found us attractive enough to enter into this act together, that we played the field well enough and used our skills well enough to do it. But like, there's this fulfillment that we're looking for. And oftentimes when we link it to love or to sex, it's those like first experiences that feel so good. There's a reason that romantic comedies almost always like roll credits after the couple gets together for the first time or after they get married. Why? Because it's a lot more complicated after that. Most of those movies do not want to show what it's like when the two of you are just trying to survive to tomorrow and get the kids where they need to go and do all the work. Like most movies want to focus on those first spark of feelings. That makes better cinema over 90 minutes. The truth is, if we are trying to find ultimate fulfillment and purpose out of a partner who completes us, or a sexual encounter that feels good, we are going to be dissatisfied, and we're going to put way too much pressure on the other person to give us something that only God can give us. But our culture, right? You wouldn't know that from watching romantic comedies or watching pornography or seeing commercials for Match.com. Like, you wouldn't know that. Like, you would think that the solution to all of your problems, all of your loneliness, all of your lack of purpose could be fulfilled if you just find that person. And I got to tell you, a lot of marriage counseling I've done over the years has been with couples that had unrealistic expectations of one another entering into the marriage because they really thought that this person, finally, I'm going to feel complete with them. And what they didn't realize is that was actually just a line from Tom Cruise and is not necessarily applicable to your whole life. So money. So one of the questions you got to ask yourself around love and sex is what is my motivation, right? Why am I getting into this relationship? Am I getting into it because I love this person? I think that we would make a great team and take the world together. Like, we share a faith, we share a philosophy, we share a way of life, and we'd be better together than when we are apart. Are those the reasons that I'm entering into that because I love this person enough to serve them, to lay my life down for them, to love them as Christ loved the church? Like, that's the way Paul says marriage should look like in one of his letters in the New Testament. So what is my motivation? What is it? And we've got to ask that when it comes to love and to sex. Because if we're not careful, we'll make an idol out of it just like the world around us does. Second one, money. Money. Now, here's what's interesting. I've had people set up meetings to talk to me about things they've struggled with many, many times over the years, right? And it's always good to talk because whatever you're struggling with, I assure you, there's lots of people here who have struggled with that or are currently struggling with that or will struggle with that. Like, the problems we have, the challenges we face, they're not unique to us. They're shared by other people. And so I've had people who've, been asked, they've asked to sit down. Can I sit down? I want to talk about this addiction issue I'm having or this relationship issue I'm having or this extended family issue that I'm having. A friend of mine who got married a few years ago, and he said, Josh, my entire life, I always worried about what my mother-in-law would be like. I would always hear these horror stories of mother-in-laws, like monster-in-laws, like I was so nervous about it, like all the time. He said, and then I got married and I realized like 6 months in, oh, my mom's the horrible mother-in-law. Plot twist. I did not see that coming, man. So I've had people sit down for all kinds of like relational issues to talk it out or issues that they're struggling with, sin issues that they're struggling with. I have never had once a person ask me to sit down because they feel like they struggle too much with greed. It's never happened. Why? Because it's so easy to convince ourselves that that's not an issue for us. That's somebody else's problem. For many of us, we actually increase our earning power, earning potential over the course of our lives. And we're better off now than we were, 5 years ago and 10 years ago. And I know that's not everybody's story. But for lots of people, that is the case. But you always feel like, you never quite have enough. And it's obvious to you that you can't be the one struggling with greed or with making money an idol, because you know people who make way more than you. Your social circles are different probably than they were when you were in your teens or your 20s. Like if you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, beyond, your social circles have expanded. There's people you know who have less than you, and there's people you know who have way more than you. Those are the people who struggle with money. It's them. It's never me. But I just want for a moment to consider the fact that there are surface idols and there are deep idols. And money is often the surface idol that shows a deeper idol, a deeper struggle that we have. I used to love the television show Parks and Rec. And there was this great segment that they did called Treat Yourself. And they would do it like once a year. A couple of the folks from the show would go out and they would treat themselves to manicures and massages and expensive electronics and whatever it was. And it was this idea that I work hard, life is difficult, and I just need to treat myself, right? I deserve it. And for many of us then, maybe we don't struggle with alcohol addiction or drug addiction or pornography addiction or any other kinds of addictions. But for many of us, when we get depressed or when we feel anxious or when we feel overwhelmed, spending money and accumulating stuff becomes our way of self-medicating. It's not just the money, that's the surface thing, but it's something below that. It's this need for fulfillment. It's this need to like check out for a minute and not have to worry about my problems, to lower the complexity for just a minute. And so we go and we spend all this money and we do feel better for a little while, and then the bills start rolling in and it makes us feel worse. And then we got stuff that we can't afford, and we feel so bad that it makes us go out and buy more stuff to feel better. And it just becomes this cycle. Now, you might be thinking, well, Josh, that's not me. Like, I don't do that. I save every single cent. I make sure. Well, you may have a deep idol as well. I've talked to couples who, like, one of them spends a lot and the other is so upset. Like, they spend all the time, they buy all this stuff for themselves, they buy all this stuff, and they don't realize that they're so upset about their spouse spending, but their issue is that they are stingy and don't want to spend anything and don't want to give any money away. And they can't be generous. Why? Their spouse is self-medicating with money, and they are having the idol of security be fed by the fact that they don't spend anything. It's mine. I'm mad at her because she doesn't realize it's mine. I'm mad at him because he doesn't realize it's mine. And they can't see it. Money's the surface idol. But there are deep reasons that people can have for ending up making that very, very important, the accumulation of stuff. And what you have to be careful with stuff is sometimes you own your stuff, and sometimes your stuff owns you. And for some of us, we've fallen into the trap of either spending or never spending because there's something going on just below the surface, and money's become an idol for us. So we got to ask ourselves, whatever our habits are around money, what is my motivation? What is it? Why do I treat it the way I do, spend it the way I don't, spend it the way I do, refuse to spend it the way that I don't? Like, why is that I approach it that way? Because if we're not careful, it can become an idol, and we can convince ourselves that this good thing, money can be a good thing, is an ultimate thing. And we'll look to find purpose either in the money or in the stuff the money can buy or in the security that money can provide, instead of looking for it in God. Finally, last thing, power. Power. Now, I know a lot of us are thinking like, well, that's not really me. Like, I don't seek to have power. That sounds like, a Lex Luthor kind of play. Like, it's not who I am. I would argue that you've probably sought power and control since you were very young, because a lot of us have that in us. I have two boys, William and Jack. Will is 5 years old. Jack is 8 years old. Will wants to be in charge. Will wants to have control, and he's 5. Took them rafting in New Mexico a few weeks ago. We had a great time. And we got there, there's like 40 people going rafting, so they have all these different rafts and all these different guides. And so the guy who's running the show, we walk up, we've got our helmets on, we've got our life preservers on, and he hands all 3 of us our paddles, and he says, hey, you guys are with James today. James is our best guide. You guys are gonna have a great day. You go over here. So we head over there, and as I'm walking away, I hear him talking to the next group, and he says, hey, you guys are with Mark today. Mark is our best guide. You're gonna have a great day over here. So I'm like, well, I don't feel good about James anymore. So we get to the raft, and I don't know that James realized when he was assigned 3 people that it was 1 dude and 2 little boys. And so he sees this, and I just see his face fall immediately because it's just the 4 of us. So they get their paddles, and he's instructing them to get in the boat, and he's telling them where to sit and what to do. And they're so excited about rafting that they're kids, and they're just not paying much attention. And they're like playing with their paddles and looking around. And so he looks at me, he's like, boys, guys, give me your paddles, little bros. Give me the paddles, little bros. And so they hand him the paddles. They're like, why? He said, because I'm talking to you, and you're not inspiring me with confidence. And Will at 5 is like, inspire with confidence? What are we talking about here? He's like, I just need you guys to sit down. So I get in the front. I can tell he's annoyed that it's just, because he says, hey, bro, it's just me and you, bro. Just me and you. So I need you to paddle hard, bro. It's just the 2 of us, bro. I'm like, okay, I get it. You're annoyed about the whole thing. Let's go. So I feel like all this pressure to paddle like a champion paddler, right? So I'm doing everything I can in the front. And then Will's right behind me. He keeps saying, Dad, I need my paddle. Dad, I want my paddle in front. I'm like, shut up. This man is going to throw us off the boat. Be quiet. Your life depends on it. So he finally simmers down a little bit. We get about half an hour out, and I guess like I've inspired him with confidence, and the children have listened a little bit better. And so he gives the paddles back to the kids. And they listen to him. And he tells them when to paddle, and they do. And they're not helping a lot, but they're not hurting us. And then a few minutes go by, and Will starts doing Will things. He's trying to hit fish with it in the water. So James from the back is like, hey, little bro, you got to listen to me, man, or I'm going to take your paddle back. I'm the captain of this boat. And then Will says, you're not the captain. And I said, yeah, no, Will, he is. He's the guide. He's the captain of the boat. And Will goes, he's not the captain. So James reaches up and snatches the paddle back from William, gets down on his level and says, who's the captain? My 5-year-old son folded his arms, narrowed his eyes, and stared at James for what felt like about 7 hours. It was probably like 20 seconds. And finally he said, you're the captain. And James shook his head, that's right. And he handed the paddle back, and then Will looks at him and goes, but I didn't mean it. I was afraid we were going to get thrown off the boat right there, but James just laughed so hard that it was all good after that. He's 5. What does he want? Power, control, and a paddle. That's what he wants. You think you don't want power and control? You absolutely do. And a lot of us think like, well, no, not me. I don't need power. That's not my thing. But for some of us, we've been convinced that maybe you can't get power on your own, but you can get political power. So for some of us, we've gotten super into a political power mantra. That's the direction we've tried to go. And we've got to ask ourselves, what is my motivation? But we have to ask another question besides what is my motivation. We have to ask something else. Because see, you're influenced by people and media and companies. And we have to ask, what is the motivation of the people, media, and companies who influence us? In 1998, I was the editor of the Grand Saline High School yearbook. And I was supposed to go around to businesses in Grand Saline, Texas, and try to get them to take out an ad in our yearbook so that we could fund the yearbook. And I went to this nursing home, and I went to talk to the lead nursing home administrator. This is the person in charge of basically the whole place and in charge of the ordering and everything. And she had me sit in her office, but she was on a phone call. And so she was like, I'll be with you right after I'm on this phone call. She was on the phone with Procter & Gamble because Procter & Gamble was the parent company for where they were getting all of the detergent that they used to wash all the clothing in the entire nursing home. And she was on the phone to cancel their contract because she'd gotten an email forward. Remember email forwards? This was back before Facebook. Like used to, we got our gossip from email forwards, right? Before we got it from Facebook. And so she had gotten this email, and I was looking this week, and I found the email that she got, and I'm so excited to read it to you. And she was over this email, which is false. This email that I'm about to read is false. This email I'm about to read did not happen. Nothing in this email is true. Are you with me? Thank you. This is how rumors get started. She got this email that was false, but she believed it and was about to cancel her entire contract with Procter & Gamble. And someone had sent it to people to in the most insidious way you can imagine. So here's the email said. The president of Procter & Gamble appeared on the Phil Donahue Show on March 1st, 1994. He announced that due to the openness of our society, he was coming out of the closet about his association with the Church of Satan. Well, it's good so far, right? Let's see what else it says. He stated that a large portion of his profits from Procter & Gamble products goes to support this satanic church. When asked by Donahue if stating this on TV would hurt his business, he replied, and by the way, this next sentence was carefully crafted to make Christians as angry and fearful as possible. Here's the sentence: there are not enough Christians in the United States to make a difference. That's the email. Have I mentioned it's not true? No one from Procter & Gamble did that. But you got to ask, what is the motivation of the people in media who are influencing me? I have no idea who sent that email. I assume it was Johnson & Johnson. I don't know for sure. But they decided to cancel their entire order with Procter & Gamble because of this. Here's what we know. We are highly influenced by the media and the people who we let into our lives. And what I've seen over the last several years is that for many of us who think, nah, it's not me, I'm not power hungry, we've been convinced that what we really need to do is seek political power. And we've been given all kinds of reasons that sound good to do it. But what it's led to is a more divided country and a less Christ-like church. That's what it's led to. Because as people are walking away from the church, and a lot of people have walked away from the church, we've seen people choose to walk away from the last 20, 30 years especially. I think that the new religion in the United States isn't Christianity, it's not Islam, it's not Buddhism, it's not Judaism. The new religion in the United States is politics. When I talk with people, they bring it up constantly. They point to the article they read, the show they just watched, the email they just got in their inbox from that politician. It is the topic du jour every single day. They bring it up constantly. They marinate in it. It's what they think on the most. They've been convinced it's the very most important thing in their life. And the challenge with this, as followers of Jesus Christ, right, is that there are parts of society and countries and political parties that the gospel aligns with, and there are parts that it pushes back on, always. And so over and over and over again, I see people choosing politics as their religion, even if they choose Jesus as their savior, and Jesus ends up becoming more the mascot to support the political party that they identify with than he does their Lord. And you got to ask yourself, what is the motivation of the people in the media who are influencing me? And please know that all of the TV stations, the news media that you consume, all of it pretty much is owned by 5 or 6 mega companies who have figured out, especially in the last 20 years, that the way to keep more eyeballs on the television and the way to raise more money is to make all of us more angry and more fearful. And man, they are doing a good job. People are more scared and more angry than I've ever seen them before. Why? Because there are people making a lot of money off of making us scared and angry. And when you're trying to make people scared and angry, you can raise a lot of money, you can get a lot of eyeballs on your thing, but you can't solve problems there. Because it starts to make you think that everybody who sees the world differently than you, or who votes differently than you, or who watches a different news station than you do, they're not just somebody of a different opinion. They're evil. They're wrong. They're demonic. And this is the pattern. We've got to start asking, what's the motivation of the people in media who are influencing me as we're thinking about our own obsession with power, political power, personal control? What is my motivation? That's the question. When it comes to these idols in our culture that may not be so obvious, because when everybody's bowing down, it becomes unthinkable to stand. It may not seem like an idol because, well, everybody does that. Everybody's interacting like that. Everyone's thinking like that about love and sex and money and power and political power. Everyone's thinking about it like that. And yet in the midst of it all, we've got to recognize that the gospel of Jesus Christ shows us a different way. That Jesus was the one who laid his life down so that others of us might live. And that these idols that the world is handing us is all about our own self-fulfillment, self-control, self-purpose, self-empowerment. It's all about that stuff, and it's not very much about sacrifice. In other words, it is the anti-Christ. And there is that spirit of being anti-Christ that infiltrates every culture and that we all have to be aware of. And therefore, we all have to ask the question, what is my motivation? And then the second question we have to ask is, yeah, but what is my motivation really? Because it's not enough to just glance at it and keep walking. King Nebuchadnezzar turned to his royal officials. And he said, did we not throw 3 Hebrew children into the fire? And the royal officials responded, yes, oh, verily, verily, live long forever, O king. Surely we did. Well, I see 4. And the 4th one looks like a son of the gods. In the midst of standing up against the flow of culture and refusing to bow down to the idols, 3 Hebrew children were thrown into the fire, but they weren't alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to them, consoling them, empowering them. And if we're going to live lives that look radically different than what the culture around us hands us, we need to know that we do not live them alone. God is with us. He is for us. And he is consistently pushing us forward to more and more reflect his kingdom, to more and more reflect our Christ. And it is that difference in us that might actually one day turn the tide of division and longing and lack of purpose in this state, in this country, in this world. If we believe that Jesus is our hope, then it's where we should find our fulfillment. And anything else is just a cheap idol. God, thank you for what we find in Christ. It's unlike what we find in anything else. And I pray, Lord, that you would give us wisdom to see what is good and what is destructive about the places we live. Father, would you give us the wisdom to uphold the goodness, to point it out, to praise it, but to push back against the darkness. And Father, I just pray that when the entire world is flowing one way, but it's a way that doesn't reflect the kind of life of love and grace and God-centeredness that Christ has called us to, we'd be able to stand when other people are hitting their knees. Father, may we be a community that's so dedicated to this, that we're inspiring to those who are still trying to figure it out. And God, may we show the grace and love and reconciliation that you have brought to us, to the world around us. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.